So far in this deposition course, we've covered everything that needs to occur before you go and take someone's deposition. How to plan, how to strategize, how to script, all of that is already done. In this video, we're gonna cover the 12 tips and tricks to go and take someone's deposition successfully, which means that it is now time. Let's maybe dial that down from a 10 to, let's just say, a solid 6. Welcome to Law Venture, a channel and brand devoted to lawyers and future lawyers so you can take your legal career to the next level. Who am I? My name's Jarrett Stone. I'm the owner of Stone Firm PLLC, and I'm your guide to depositions, in particular covering the 12 tips and tricks to dominating and taking your next deposition. But first things first, some housekeeping matters. If you are new to the Law Venture channel or brand, be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can get future content as it's rolled out. The goal here is to provide you legal education so you can take that legal career to the next level, but doing it and executing it in a way that doesn't bore you to death. If you're interested, again, subscribe down below. And whether or not you are new to the channel or if you're a vet at this point, consider hitting that like button as well. Not only does it support the channel, but it helps feed the YouTube algorithm. It's hungry for likes, and that's the best way to feed it. In doing so, it allows videos like this to reach more people, to rank higher, and ultimately help more people like yourself. Another thing to bring up to get you oriented is that this particular video is a lesson in a free online course that's available over at lawventure.com. If you type in lawventure.com, go to the website, go to courses, go to this particular course, you're gonna see a whole bunch of free lessons with extra details in the body of the lesson so that you can get the most out of the content and the most out of videos like this. I mean, who doesn't love free? Okay, so let's dive into this video lesson, and to do that, we need to provide context here. Remember, you just completed a lesson that was a monster lesson involving all the preparation that goes into eventually taking someone's deposition. Now let's be open and upfront here. If you want this lesson right now, the one that you're watching, to solve all of your problems, to help spoon feed you a successful deposition, this is not the video lesson for you. The previous lesson, when it comes to preparation, is the video that's going to make your deposition a whole lot easier. In this particular video lesson, involving all the tips and tricks to taking someone's deposition, the important thing to remember is that you basically just have to execute all the preparation and planning and strategizing that you did in the previous lesson. So you should, relatively speaking, be smooth sailing from this point out. Now it's time to talk about the 12 tips and tricks to taking a successful deposition. Tip number 1, you need to establish the ground rules at the beginning of your deposition. By establishing ground rules at the very beginning of the deposition, you're accomplishing several things. First, it establishes the tone of the deposition. For example, and this is something that I like to do in order to show that this isn't a super contentious event in this litigation process. Help ease the adversarial feeling that is associated with depositions. In particular, I tell the deponent that, look, you can take a break at any point in time. This isn't intended to be an interrogation. All I ask is that if there's a pending question, you answer the question, then let me know that you like to go on a break. More than happy to go on the break after the question's been answered. Second, it establishes some levels of rules to the deposition between you and the deponent. Using the same example, we have now kind of established that if there is a question that's asked, then be sure to answer it before you go on a break. The underlying reason is I don't need you going on a break with a pending question, talking to your lawyer, then coming back with a spoon-fed answer. So by establishing this ground rule at the very beginning, this is a rule that the deponent is agreeing to follow. The third benefit is by establishing the ground rules at the beginning of the deposition, what you're basically doing is kind of already pinning down the deponent without actually asking any questions. For example, I think it's absolutely necessary for all lawyers who are taking a deposition to establish the ground rule that if a question is asked and the deponent answers that question, then it's fair for the lawyer to assume that the deponent understood the question, and as a result, the answer is directly related to that question. Put differently, you can also say, look, if I ask you a question that you don't understand or that you may have a question on, please let me know. I always joke that, look, it's not a matter of if I ask a bad question, it's more like when I ask a bad question. And when I ask a bad question, you don't understand it, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to either restate the question or rephrase the question so that you can understand the question and then ultimately answer that deposition question. A lot of questions were said in the last few sentences, but you understand what I'm getting at. Now, in doing so, let's say at trial, after this deposition, if you're cross-examining the deponent on their answers, then they may try and wiggle out of a bad answer for them by saying, oh, look, I just didn't understand the question. That's when you go back to the ground rules at the very beginning of the deposition, showing, look, we had an agreement on the record saying that if you didn't understand the question, then you would let me know. In that situation, during the deposition on that particular day, you didn't ask any questions about the particular question I was asking, and you answered it, and we agreed that if you answered a question, we're on the same page that you understood the question. And then you go through your cross-examination, maybe an impeachment in that situation. That's a whole other video, but with these three benefits to establishing ground rules, that's why you always want to start your deposition with these ground rules. I can pretty much guarantee that most of y'all who are watching this video right now are like, okay, Jarrett, go through all the ground rules. I need to know what they are so I can say them at the beginning of the deposition. Well, look, I'm gonna be honest with you. We're not doing that in this video, because if I went through all the ground rules and then went through the commentary on the pros and cons of each specific ground rule, what they're intended to do, this lesson is gonna go on for far too long. So what I'll do as a compromise is, if you go down in the body of this lesson over on lawventure.com, just scroll down, I'll put some of the ground rules and I'll provide some commentary on whether or not it's necessary, whether or not it's a little overkill, or whether or not you can probably just take it out. And in doing so, what I plan on doing eventually is releasing a video that provides a little bit more commentary on each of the ground rules, and I'll plug it in down below as well. In either event, make sure you are on lawventure.com so you can get that information. If someone on YouTube complains about this not being available, it's a free lesson. It is available. Again, go over, check it out. Tip number 2, whenever you're taking someone's deposition, listen for objections. You know how sometimes there's maybe like a beeping going on in your house, like you forgot to change the battery to a smoke alarm or something, and it's just like beeping and beeping. Then at some point you kind of forget that it's beeping and it's just like going on and on and on. And then somebody comes over and is like, what is that beeping? And you're like, oh yeah, there's something beeping. I totally forgot. I've just kind of tuned it out. Well, I feel like some lawyers start tuning out the objections that other lawyers are making while they're taking someone's deposition. I do not do that. Instead, I really hone in on the fact that whenever I am taking someone's deposition, if I hear a lawyer object, my mind starts going through a checklist of several things. As soon as I hear an objection being raised during my line of questioning, the first thing I ask myself is, did I just ask a bad question? And I don't get flustered by it. Like I said, it's a matter of when, not if, I ask a bad question. And if I go through my mental checklist, if I take the time to pause and think about the question I just asked, and also kind of think about why would they be objecting to that question, I can sometimes almost instinctually figure out, oh, this is their objection. For example, they're objecting to calls for speculation. This can sometimes be extremely important, because whenever you ask a question that's a bad question, it may be speaking wise, and this is a horrible phrasing, but speaking wise, it may make sense to the deponent. They know exactly what you're talking about. But when it comes to the technical record, that question may not be technically kosher and may be objectionable that the judge may sustain. So whenever you hear a question, for example, an objection, and then that objection is, for example, let's say calls for speculation, you may realize, okay, I haven't established that this deponent has personal knowledge on this matter that I'm asking the question about. In other words, I jumped the gun a little bit, so let's maybe strike the question, back it up, establish that personal knowledge does exist, and then come back with this question and see what they object to. If they object after you've established more of that basis, after you've set the record straight a little bit more, then you move on to the second checklist that goes on in my mind. Am I now pushing on a pressure point for the other side? Because if I start hearing objections and I can't very quickly figure out exactly why they're objecting, then I start thinking, okay, maybe this is an area that they don't want me to talk about, or they don't want their witness or client to really expand upon. And maybe they're trying to show a red flag to their witness, and that red flag is also being waved, obviously, for me to know as well. And if that's the case, if I get a sense that tension has now entered the room, then you better believe I'm gonna poke around and I'm gonna ask some more questions to see where this line of thinking goes. If I notice that an objection's raised and the deponent's answers start getting shorter and shorter, then I'm gonna be asking more open-ended questions. Well, tell me more about that. And then in doing so, see if I can get a little bit more nuggets here, a little bit more nuggets there to help expand the deposition testimony, and maybe in the moment, pivot on my strategy very slightly, and then ultimately get back to my script that I know is going to be bulletproof as we continue forward. The third thing that crosses my mind whenever I hear this objection as I'm taking someone's deposition is whether or not I need to ask for the basis of the objection. Sometimes you just know that it's a valid objection, you know what their objection is, you pivot like we talked about in the first approach. Sometimes with the second approach, you know it's a bogus objection, and if they throw out one bogus objection, I may let it slide, not ask for a basis, and then poke and prod on that pressure point. Other times you start thinking, am I missing something? Am I not able to connect these dots quick enough? Or am I getting a ton of bogus objections, and do I kind of need to put my foot down? So in doing so, if I've reached kind of this threshold of, okay, let's see where they're coming from, then I'll ask the lawyer to state their basis for the objection on the record. In doing so, that puts them on the spot. If they come up with a bogus objection, then in that situation, I also know that I'm pressing on that pressure point, and I need to maybe flesh out a little bit more of the testimony because I'm in a good area. I'm in that like red zone, ready to score, and the defense is starting to tighten up. On the other aspect of it, let's say the deposition, sorry, I have an itch right there. I don't know if that's a hair or what. On the, I got totally taken off what I was about to say. But on the other end, let's say the actual objection is valid, then what that can often do is provide a benefit, which is if it's a valid objection, that gives you the opportunity to maybe pivot, rephrase the question, or strike the question, back up in your line of questioning, help maybe solidify something like personal knowledge, establish maybe more foundation, and then re-ask the question or rephrase the question in light of the extra foundation. A lot going on right there, which means that when it's all boiled down, whenever you are taking someone's deposition, you can't be lazy with your knowledge of objections. I highly recommend that if you're not comfortable with objections, check out the free objection cheat sheet that just popped up. It has 21 trial objections. It has basically an analysis of when to make the objection, how to respond to the objection. Seriously, you need to check it out. It's free. Link down in the description. Tip number 3, stay calm. Depositions are like pickup basketball. It's where there are no referees. In fact, the only referees that are there during pickup basketball are the players. You're a player that may call your own foul. You're a player that may call a foul that you made on another player on the other team. So there's maybe like a conflict of interest at times. There may not be. And all you hope is everyone is fair, everyone's truthful, no one's being shady, and you have a productive game or deposition. Contrast that with trial, or contrast that with an actual basketball game where you have an actual referee, i.e. a judge at trial, and that judge or referee makes sure everything is as kosher as possible, or that's the intended design there. So with depositions, there's the natural tension with having an adversarial part of the litigation process not have any actual referees. And in doing so, if you're really having a successful deposition from your perspective, it's going to make the deponent uncomfortable, and it's going to make the deponent's attorney uncomfortable as well. That means you're doing your job. How they respond to that discomfort is really going to depend on the situation. It's going to depend on the person. And oftentimes that increases the tension as well. And it's your job as the one who is basically controlling the deposition, because you're the one taking it, is to remain calm, and in doing so, keep chipping away at the other side's case by going through the questions that you need to ask based on what you prepared for, outlined, and strategized. Just because tension is rising because you're doing a great job, that doesn't mean you need to let off the gas at any point. It also doesn't mean that you need to escalate things by having some type of power trip and then meeting everyone at that level of adversarialism, not playing nice. So at the end of the day, stay calm. When tensions rise, that means you're doing a good job, and so that should provide you extra comfort. Tip number 4, listen for loopholes. Some witnesses and deponents try and be sneaky by giving you answers that they can massage later on and kind of insert here on what they actually meant in the context of whatever is best and most favorable to them. But as the person who is taking the deposition, it is your job to pin that person down on an answer. Or alternatively, if they refuse to answer the question directly, then at that point you can state your objection, you can go compel that answer, or you can really flush it out and kind of make the witness look bad. So look, if you end up getting an answer that isn't necessarily an answer, or the answer has some soft language that they can maybe try and wiggle out, it's your job during the deposition to pin that witness down. So stay on your toes. Tip number 5, do not fear silence. Whenever I first started taking people's depositions, it was kind of foreign to me because I took the approach of it being closer to a cross-examination than what a deposition truly is, which is that with depositions, you're simply trying to create a record and you're trying to pin down the deponent as you do that, which means that you're not having to worry as much about how the theater of the deposition is going. Whenever you're cross-examining someone at trial or in the courtroom, in the back of your mind, you need to be thinking about the theater. You need to be thinking about the pace. You need to be thinking about your tone. You need to make sure that your cross-examination is as engaging from the jury and judge's perspective as possible. Not really the same in depositions, because in reality, the jury and the judge most likely aren't going to sit from beginning to end with the entire deposition. They're just going to take pieces here, pieces there. And so your goal is really to make sure that the pieces are as locked down as possible. To achieve this goal, that means you sometimes need to stop, look at your notes, get on track, maybe write some notes out to circle back to, maybe pull up an exhibit. Take your time during the deposition and don't get uncomfortable simply because there's a lull in the deposition. And surprisingly, sometimes the deponent will feel awkward with the silences, and in that situation will sometimes add on extra information to their answer in order to fill the awkward silence. And oftentimes that extra information may be exactly what you need to add to your arsenal for later. Tip number 6, don't cut off the deponent. This one is simple, but it's a mistake that every lawyer makes, and I'm guilty of it as well. You do not want to cut off the deponent, because every word is a potential weapon for your arsenal. And so you need to make sure that every answer is the full and complete answer. If you find yourself cutting the deponent off, stop immediately, say, I apologize, I'll strike the question. Please, explain exactly what you were saying before I rudely cut you off. In doing so, get the full answer, get the full context out there. If you need to re-ask the question so they can fully answer it again, don't be afraid to do that as well. Tip number 7, take a break. Sometimes during the course of the deposition, you may get information you weren't expecting, you may get off your script, you may kind of just be in no man's land a little bit. Taking a break can help be a little bit of a refresher. Taking a break can also get you back to your home base, get you a little oriented. I also recommend that before you end up passing the witness for the other side's lawyer to potentially ask their deposition questions, take a break at that point right before you pass. In doing so, go through your checklist, go through your script, make sure that you completed everything that you needed to complete. And that way, if you do pass the witness and the other side says that they don't have any questions and the deposition ends, you didn't leave any meat on the bone. Tip number 8, be a record snob. So I'm going to couple this one with don't cut off the witness, but sometimes you kind of have to. Now, there are often times where a deponent who's a non-lawyer typically is providing an answer, but isn't making the answer ultra clear for the record. For example, if I'm talking about Bob, and Bob did this and Bob did that, and then Jim enters the picture and Jim did this and Jim did that, and then I'm also talking about, so he then did this and he then turned the corner and then he was then driving. The question is, who is he? You can maybe assume he is maybe Jim because Jim was most recently talked about, but you need to be the record snob. You need to go for that overkill to ultimately ask the question, okay, who is he whenever you said this, this, and that? Or maybe stop them and say, okay, let's clear some things up. Whenever you're saying he, who are you talking about? Oh, I'm talking about Bob, actually. Okay, now whenever you go through your answer, can you verify or clarify which one you're talking about by just simply referring to their name? Okay, so Bob did this, Bob did that. And that way, again, everything's clear on the record with who is playing what role in the story or the answer. You should also be a record snob when it comes to witnesses and deponents trying to use their hands to tell the story, to where sometimes the deponent will be like, yeah, so I was driving like this, and then the other person did that, and then did this. None of that, if there's just a written transcript, is actually going to make any sense. Your best bet is if you're recording it, that the video camera is picking up with what's going on. If you realize, yeah, this isn't making a clear record, you may need to stop the witness and have them explain and go into, detail with what they're showing. And in doing so, make sure it's clear. Alternatively, if they can't clearly explain it, pull out a piece of paper and maybe draw out exactly what they're talking about, have the certain points, mark it as an exhibit. That way you have maybe a more clear record of what the deponent was trying to say originally. And a super common one is the head nods or the head shakes. A lot of times whenever you're having a casual conversation with someone, you don't really need to say anything, you can just nod your head. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't always translate well to the stenographer. The stenographer may put head nods in the affirmative or head nods in the negative or something like that, but make everyone's job easier. If there's a head nod, then ask them if they mean yes and say, hey, look, I'm not trying to pick on you, but I need a verbal answer for the record. Is that a yes? If they say yes, and then at least you have that confirmation. I know, it's overkill, but you gotta be that record snob to make sure you have a bulletproof record. Tip number 9, don't be greedy. This piece of advice is a little tricky and it's going to be case specific and case dependent, but oftentimes during my deposition, I'm going into the deposition with certain strategies in mind. For example, I'm trying to go in and get certain pieces of evidence so maybe I can file my own motion for summary judgment on behalf of the client, or no evidence motion for summary judgment on behalf of the client. And so I'm trying to get these nuggets here, these nuggets there, or pieces to the puzzle so I can ultimately use it for that motion, use it for trial, use it whenever. And when you get those nuggets or those puzzle pieces, sometimes it's best to just move on and ask another series of questions, flesh something else out without having to spotlight that particular puzzle piece that you just got, that gold nugget, that gold ticket. And the risk here is that sometimes you are just riding this high of like, oh man, I got the testimony that I needed to get. And the deponent has no idea that they just gave me that favorable testimony. And the risk you run is this temptation is like, okay, I have the power now. I have this favorable testimony. Let's ask more and more questions on this so I can just like ultra bulletproof this and they have no other way to get out of it. And we're just gonna just padlock this bad boy up. In doing so, what you may end up causing is a spotlight to go on the gold nugget that you ended up getting. And that may make the deponent a little bit more defensive. That may raise more objections, or the other side may start objecting. That may cause the other side to say during a break, hey, you need to go back and maybe fix this answer, fix that answer. Instead, in your deposition, take your wins. Don't be greedy about it. Don't, spotlight it. Don't gloat by asking additional questions. Just put it in your back pocket and move on. Tip number 10, sometimes let the deponent do the heavy lifting. This will often come with the territory of having a great deposition, which is that the deponent will start lashing out against you. The deponent may be more adversarial, maybe more abrasive. It's not your job to put the deponent in their place necessarily. What I mean by this is that let them embarrass themselves on the record. Hopefully there's a video involved, and let them embarrass themselves on video. That way, if they try and Jekyll and hide the situation at trial by, trying to look like they're this great person, then you can always play the video at trial to show, yeah, this isn't how they always act. They're a little bit more abrasive, and here's Exhibit A. In doing so, let them do the heavy lifting. You don't need to be the one who's having to embarrass and call them out, because the risk you run is that you may come off abrasive as well, and that may show that this deposition was an intense environment, and maybe the jury is a little bit more sympathetic for the non-lawyer, for the deponent, for the witness who's testifying. So show that you're doing everything you can to create a safe space during this deposition, and this person is just being unreasonable. Tip number 11, don't fear rephrasing. Look, as much as I'm a proponent of sticking to your script, at some point, if you end up asking a bad question, or if the question is confusing and the deponent asks for you to rephrase it, don't get stubborn. Don't just ask it in a different way by saying the same words, but like inflecting certain points of the sentence to where maybe it sounds different. Instead, be comfortable to where you're like water. You're adjusting in the situation, and in doing so, ask it in a similarly effective way, but ask it in a different way that maybe makes a little bit more sense. Sometimes the context of the question, or the vocab that's being used, or maybe the deponent just wants extra time to think about it, is why the deponent's asking for you to rephrase it. In either event, if you can rephrase the question in a way that's just as effective as the original question, then you're still going to be able to accomplish the same thing. Just don't get flustered whenever that happens. Tip number 12, use humor to show confidence. This is a personal tip for me, which is to use humor in order to show that I'm extremely comfortable in this situation. In doing so, I'll often make a joke about, look, sometimes I'll ask a question that you may not understand because I'm freezing in my office. Whenever I shut the door to help prevent, noises coming in, then it kind of turns my office into an icebox. So if my voice is shaking, I apologize. Just let me know. I'll be happy to rephrase it. And saying something like that is kind of, it's disarming, but it also shows like, yeah, this may be a contentious situation, but I feel totally fine. Like, there's nothing awkward here for me. And in doing so, throughout the deposition, I'll make a joke here and there. Oftentimes, whenever I'm trying to work the technology, try and share screens and, make jokes about me not being able to figure it out. Anything like that, to where even if the other side isn't having a good time, I'll show that, look, I'm having a good time. I just make sure that I do it in a way that's palatable for the other side, to where it's not insulting by any means. All right, that sums up the 12 tips and tricks for taking someone's deposition. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, or if you just want to say hi, leave those in the comment section down below. If you're still on YouTube, or if you want to hop over to YouTube, be sure to hit the like button, because if you're still watching, I'm hoping you liked the video. Don't forget to subscribe down below. And with all that said, I'll see you in the next lesson.